Welcome back, Kaiju fans. Today we're going to be doing another origin theory, like I did for King Ghidorah, and this time we're going to be taking a look at Rodan. Rodan makes a lot of sense for Legendary's Monsterverse. Rodan is really just a oversized pteranodon. The interesting thing about Rodan is that it has a similar backstory to Godzilla, in the sense that nuclear testing was what woke the creature up in the original Rodan movie. But unlike Godzilla, which was basically blamed on Americans' nuclear testing, Rodan was equivalent to the Soviet Union's testing, which is kind of interesting. And Rodan's name in Japanese is Rodan, which you've probably heard before, which is literally just a cut from the word pteranodon. So the pteranodons were a species of flying reptile, one of the largest flying reptiles in the Cretaceous period. The Cretaceous period is kind of interesting for my theories lately, because if you haven't watched the King Ghidorah one, my idea is that we're going to have a similar Ghidorah to Cretaceous Ghidorah from Rebirth of Mothra 3. So it's interesting that the pteranodons were also originated from the Cretaceous period, and that's basically what Rodan is based off of. So in the original Rodan or Radon movie, Rodan is an egg that has been buried basically inside of a volcano. And this egg is awoken by nuclear testing, and we have our first Rodan that is hatched. This particular aspect definitely fits into our Monsterverse-like ideology that all these monsters are coming from underground, being awoken. So what I think could make sense is, what if our Rodan in the Godzilla King of Monsters 2019 Monsterverse movie isn't already born, but is an egg that is slowly being incubated by nuclear radiation somewhere on the planet, which could help explain why we haven't quite seen this monster yet, since the cave paintings of the ancient versions of Rodan. They could have potentially laid eggs, and they have been lying in wait to hatch, kind of like the Gauss from Gamera Guardian of the Universe, how the eggs have been laid and they're just waiting for the ideal time to hatch. So what if our Rodan is kind of like the original Rodan movie, where the egg is already somewhere buried beneath the earth and is just waiting to hatch? This could probably be the easiest explanation that they could go with. I'm not quite sure that they're going to want to go with the easiest explanation, because that might make things a little less interesting than doing something else with the monster's origin that we also might have potentially seen before. So Rodan probably isn't in as many movies as you remember him to be. He's really in a solo film, like 3 of the Showa films, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 and Final Wars. Rodan is one of those common monsters, but he's not super common. He's not Ghidorah level common. But in those Showa movies, particularly Invasion of Astro Monster and Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, one of the things that really seems to happen a lot with Rodan is he is literally buried in a wall somewhere. Like, literally living inside of a cliff, like hibernating. And that's really bizarre for a giant bird reptile to be doing, but that seems to be one of his kaiju-specific traits, is Rodan really, really loves being buried. So this fits our Hollow Earth theory pretty well in the Monsterverse. Rodan could very easily just be buried in a mountain somewhere, or in a volcano like the original movie, which could be help incubating him or keeping him alive, preserving his energy. Rodan loves to be buried, and that's a kind of a really unique trait, and that's why it fits so well, is because the Monsterverse monsters are all basically buried, living underground in giant caverns. So Rodan might not even need to live in one of those caverns. He could literally just be buried in the side of a mountain somewhere, and the right event happens which wakes him up. Either humans discover him accidentally, or he just decides the time is right and finally awakens. This is why I think we're going to get kind of like a Showa Rodan origin, is that he might not necessarily come from a cavern underground like the Skullcrawlers live in, or where the Muto larvae hatched from in Godzilla 2014. They might not be in a giant cavern like that, but Rodan might be the last survivor of his species, and he's just buried somewhere waiting to be awakened. It fits his character personality very well, because really the only other origin for Rodan we've had in the past is Fire Radon, where Fire Radon just kind of lived on a nuclear waste island somewhere in the Pacific with the baby Godzilla egg from the Heisei series. And that Radon, that Rodan, whatever you want to use, the English or the Japanese word, that was really different. That's why it's under a different license in general. Fire Radon and Rodan they're essentially the same creature, because Radon and Rodan are the same creature. It's just the English translation wasn't used for Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in '93. They used the Japanese version, probably just to distinguish the two monsters later on. But that is a much smaller version of Rodan and much less grounded. Like, that Rodan was always flying, and that Rodan didn't exhibit the traits of being buried anywhere. It just kind of was living on this island without like any other vegetation or creatures there besides the egg. It was just completely feeding off of the radiation, which is why it had a heat ray similar to Godzilla's, and that's why they licensed it as a different monster, is because it had that heat ray. Now, Legendary has the rights for regular, basic Rodan. They do not have the rights for Fire Rodan or Fire Radon. So this kind of pushes that, like, Rodan's just chilling on an island kind of like idea out of like the possible spectrum. I mean, it's still possible, but I don't think so, because that's a trait of a monster that they didn't license, but is basically the same monster with a few different traits. And then finally, the Final Wars Rodan, I mean, we really have no idea anything about it. They just kind of put it in the movie and he was there. And that was back to the traditional Rodan. That's why he was so huge and didn't have any of his special abilities, and he was very much a physical fighter and very on the ground. So that's what's very interesting. Now, going off of the Kong Skull Island cave paintings, our Rodan cave painting looked a lot more like Fire Radon than it did our Showa or Final Wars Rodan. It looked very small, very agile, not the bulky physical combat Rodan that we've seen more commonly. So what might be interesting is that we could potentially be getting a very, very Fire Radon Rodan, but it's just going to be Rodan that looks like Fire Radon, none of the abilities. So we might be getting this very odd combo of the two versions of Rodan, which it would make sense. He's based off of a Pteranodon. Pteranodons were not kaiju size. They only had a 6 meter or 20 foot wingspan. So our Rodan in this Monsterverse is probably going to be a relatively small creature like Fire Radon. We're probably going to get a half size of Godzilla, if not less, kaiju. So we're probably going to have a very sleek, very agile Rodan that's just flying around. It's going to be weird not having the bulky physical fighting Rodan, because the reason Fire Radon was so small is because he could use beams and other abilities to make up for his inability to have a physical fight. So we're going to have this Fire Radon kind of Rodan that can't fight the way it needs to in this universe, because it's not going to have any abilities, because that's not in the licensing agreement. So our Rodan in this Monsterverse is probably going to be really strange and a really odd monster thrown in here with Ghidorah and Godzilla. They're going to be bulky, physical, and have their special abilities, and Rodan's is going to be kind of left in the dust, like, whoa, what can I even do to these larger monsters? I mean, the male Muto did some pretty good damage to Godzilla, but he had large limbs to beat things with. Rodan just has wings. It's not going to work very well. So for this monster, I'm basically going to assume he's either going to be an egg buried somewhere or is already hatched and is just buried somewhere. I don't think he's going to be living on an island. He's not on Kong Skull Island. That's one of the things that fascinates me about this community right now, is that everyone thinks every monster's origin is Skull Island. No, because the Skull Crawlers live under Skull Island, and you really think those super aggressive, highly territorial kaiju under Skull Island are just gonna be okay with another species just chilling there with them? It's gonna be someplace else. It's gonna be a different island, it's gonna be a different mountain somewhere else, probably in a different area on the planet. But he's probably gonna be there, buried somewhere in a mountain or under an island. He's gonna be buried. I'm just gonna assume that he's gonna be buried because that's what Rodan's traits are, is that he loves to be buried. And we're also gonna get a very Fire Radon-esque design, because he, in the cave painting at least, he looked very much Pteranodon-like. Very, 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 like, agile, not this bulky Rodan that we're used to. So we're gonna have an interesting kaiju here. He's going to be different than the Rodans we've seen in the past, just based off of that, because he's going to be small, but he's going to be physical. That's not a combo we've had before. That's going to be it for this theory, this discussion. Let me know what you guys think that Rodan is going to be like. Is he going to be in a mountain? Is he going to be buried under an island? Or do you think that I'm wrong and he's already just awake flying around somewhere and nobody's seen him? Let me know what you guys think. That's going to be it for this one. I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace out.